Hey everyone, let's jump right in. Today, we're demystifying a concept that, I know, sounds incredibly academic and honestly a bit intimidating. We're talking about phenomenological research. But trust me, we're going to turn this heavy philosophy into something deeply human and extremely practical. If you've ever wanted to truly understand the core of human experience, way beyond just staring at numbers on a spreadsheet, you're in the exact right place. Let's do this. So, at its absolute core, this whole methodology centers around one really simple yet profoundly deep question. What is it actually like to experience this phenomenon? See, instead of asking how often something happens, which, is what quantitative research is obsessed with, this unique approach asks us to look directly at human consciousness itself. It's a concept rooted way back in the philosophy of Edmund Husserl. His big idea? To understand the world, we first have to understand how we actually personally experience it. This comparison right here perfectly captures the contrast we're dealing with. On one side of the research world, you've got your spreadsheets, your statistics, hard numbers, measuring the raw facts. But phenomenological research? It lives completely on the other side. It focuses purely on lived experiences, feelings, and the personal stories that actually give those facts their meaning. We aren't just counting people here. We're actively trying to comprehend them. Here's our game plan for this explainer. 1. Seeing through their glasses. 2. Decoding phenomenological jargon. 3. Steps to conduct the research. 4. Evaluating strengths and weaknesses. And finally, 5. Real-world research applications. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Seeing Through Their Glasses. I absolutely love this analogy because it instantly lowers the barrier to entry. Seriously, you do not need a PhD in philosophy to grasp this. Doing phenomenological research simply means you're shifting your perspective to look through someone else's lens. You're putting on their glasses to see the world exactly as it appears to them, not how it appears to you, but to them. It's that shift in vision that makes all the difference. Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding Phenomenological Jargon. Okay, let's translate some of this heavy academic vocab into plain English. Starting with lived experience. This is literally the bedrock of the entire methodology. It means you're studying a first-hand event directly from the person who actually lived it, rather than just poking at some abstract theoretical idea. Like, if you want to understand the shift to remote education, you don't go read a textbook about it. You study the lived experience of a first-year college student who is actively adjusting to online learning right in that moment. Next up, we have the essence. Now, while every single person's experience is totally unique, phenomenological research looks for the invisible threads that tie those experiences together. The researcher is hunting for shared meanings among a group. So, going back to our online students, the essence of their experience might be a shared feeling of intense isolation, or maybe a sudden, desperate need for adaptability, or just collective stress. Basically, it's the core truth of what they went through. And finally, there's bracketing, which philosophers like to call epoche. Honestly, this is arguably the toughest part for any researcher. It's this absolutely crucial principle where you have to consciously suspend your own biases and assumptions. You literally have to mentally bracket them off and shove them to the side so you can truly prioritize the participant's voice over your own preconceived notions. To put that into perspective, if you're studying those online classes, you absolutely must leave your own opinions about Zoom or your own personal annoyances with remote work completely at the door. Think about it. If you bring your own baggage into the interview, you're no longer looking through the participants' glasses, right? You're essentially just looking in a mirror. All right, Section 3, Steps to Conduct the Research. So if you were to go out tomorrow and actually run a study, here's your exact chronological playbook. Step 1, you identify a meaningful human experience. Step 2, you carefully select participants who have had direct personal exposure to it. Step 3 is collecting your data. Step 4, like we just talked about, is conducting bracketing to set aside your own bias. Step 5 is the real heavy lifting, analyzing that data by pulling out significant statements and grouping them into overarching themes. And then Step 6, you finally present those rich, thematic descriptions to the world. Let's just quickly zoom in on Step 3 for a second, collecting data. Remember, we aren't handing out multiple choice surveys here. Researchers usually rely heavily on in-depth interviews, but things like written reflections, focus group discussions, or even analyzing people's personal diaries and journals, those are absolutely vital tools too. You just need methods that let people truly open up and give you incredibly detailed descriptions of their inner lives. Now on to Section 4, Evaluating Strengths and Weaknesses. Like any tool, this methodology isn't perfect for every single job. But on the plus side, it is incredibly powerful. It gives you this deep, rich understanding that numbers alone simply cannot provide. It gives a literal voice to participants, which makes it an absolute game changer for exploring complex, sensitive human issues. Think trauma, grief, or personal identity. Plus, because it's so open-ended, researchers have the flexibility to pivot and explore unexpected themes that might just pop up organically while they're talking to someone. But we definitely have to talk about the limitations. Analyzing these lengthy, deeply emotional narratives, it is wildly time-consuming. Because of that, your sample sizes are naturally going to be small. You might only interview, say, 10 people for a whole study. That inherently limits how much you can generalize those findings to the wider public. On top of that, the interpretation can become highly subjective if your own bias creeps in. Because of this, the methodology really requires incredibly skilled researchers who know exactly how to manage and bracket their own perspectives. And finally, Section 5, Real-World Research Applications. So, how do these academic principles actually impact the world around us? Well, it's not just theory. It's a highly practical tool. Professionals across nursing, entrepreneurship, psychology, education, you name it, they rely heavily on this kind of research. They use it to uncover the true essence of human behavior in their specific fields, and that allows them to design way better systems, better products, and provide better care, all based on actual human realities. Just look at some of these sample study titles. They show exactly why this matters so much. A study on the experiences of frontline nurses during emergencies. That isn't just for an academic journal. It gives hospitals real, actionable insights on how to prevent burnout and actually support their staff during a crisis. Or understanding the experiences of small business owners during a recession. That directly helps policymakers create better economic safety nets. It literally turns raw human struggle and human triumph into actionable knowledge. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought to chew on. Whether you're a business leader trying to figure out your customers, a nurse caring for patients, a teacher trying to connect with students, or honestly, just a person navigating everyday relationships, whose lived experience do you need to explore next? Whose glasses do you need to put on to truly see the world? I challenge you to carry that question with you today. Thanks so much for joining me.